I'm pretty sure everybody here knows that I'm not a contractor, and I don't know what contractors go through when they're building a custom house such as this. This isn't a cookie cutter house that you're buying trusses for and just slapping it together. But I have run into a pretty decent problem in my calculations with my rafters and my gable end walls. My rafters are not at the same pitch as my gable end wall. It's off by, I mean, you couldn't put it in degrees, but the top, well, there's a couple problems here. Number one, a 2x8 is not a 2x8. It's not even a 2x7 or 1.5 by 7.5 anymore. It's more like an 1.5 by 7 1/8. So me not knowing this, in my calculations of making my rafters and my gable end walls and all this, that basic 1/2 inch gap is causing me a problem. But back to the angle of the rafters versus the gable walls, I have a 1/2 inch discrepancy from the top of the rafters to the bottom of the rafters compared to the gable wall. The rafters are a 1/2 inch taller at the top. The distance from the top of the gable wall to the top of the rafter is a difference. At the top, it's a 1/2 inch taller than at the bottom. So I can't just run my outlookers from my rafter out past my gable wall, have it sit on top of my gable wall and go out and go flat. It's gonna go down. So when you look at my roof, if I were to just run what I wanted to as 2x8s, time into my rafter, go out across a gable wall, it would actually tilt down. You'd look at the roof and it would tilt down on the sides. Not to mention it's gonna be different from top to bottom at this point because my angle's not the same. I have to figure out a way to make that straight and flat. To make the angle the same, I can either drop each rafter down a 1/2 inch off the ridge beam, and that would make up the 1/2 inch difference from top to bottom. I think it'd be a 1/2 inch or somewhere close to a 1/2 inch. It would make the rafters sit at the same angle as the gable end wall. But it still wouldn't take up that extra 1/2 inch that I thought a 2x8 would be 7.5. So I made sure when I made my gable wall, it would be 7.5 inches shorter than the top of my rafter. So I'd still have to put a 1/2 inch shim all the way up that gable wall, which would be a little bit easier because it would I could use a piece of OSB. 1/2 inch OSB, I could nail it to the top of the gable wall, put my 2x8s, my 2x8 outlookers on, and then the blocking between them, and it would be finished. I think the harder part would actually be dropping each one of these rafters down a 1/2 inch and then having to shave that ridge beam because the rafters wouldn't be right at the top of that ridge beam, they'd be down a 1/2 inch. So I'd have to shave the top of that ridge beam. So when I put my OSB on, it would go right up and over that ridge beam. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a long wedge. I'm gonna make it on my sawmill out of 2x6. I'm gonna rip it down to a wedge shape, and it's gonna sit on top of that gable wall. It's gonna be a 1/2 inch thicker at the top than it is at the bottom, 20 foot, 5 inches away. So let's head over to the sawmill and find a piece of scrap. I think I have a piece of 4x4 over there that I milled out last year that's got a pretty good twist to it. I can shave it flat and then shave a long wedge out of it and put that underneath a 2x6 to mill the 2x6 into a wedge at the proper thickness. So I can put two 2x6 on top of that gable wall and it should work. Found a 4x4, 13 foot long, plenty long. I milled it out last year. It's got a pretty good twist to it. So this is, it's no good the way it sits. I'm gonna put it on the, fire the mill up and mill this flat and then mill a wedge out of it. And we'll use that wedge underneath the 2x6 to mill them at a wedge. And then we'll have something to put up there to take up that gap. So to make a wedge out of this piece, I need to wedge it off of the bunks at one end, but I want to support it at every bunk. The difference over the 21 foot is a 1/2 inch. And these window and door wedges are a 1/4 inch at the thickest point. The 2x6 I'm gonna make into wedges are they're gonna be 11 foot long, or slightly under 10.5 to make that 21 foot length. So I only want a difference in that 10 to 11 feet of a 1/4 inch, which is perfect for these door and window wedges. Went to my pine tree behind me and got some sap to stick these on there so they stay put, hopefully stay put, as I'm milling. So we'll get these put in place so they're supported and at the right angle, and we'll mill off a decent thickness of slab so that we can mill the 2x6 at the correct angle. So what we're left with, other than pitch on my hands, is 2 boards with a 1/4 inch difference in thickness from one end to the other. So we'll pick one of these and we'll set a 2x6 on top of it, lock it into place, and when we mill it flat, it will actually turn out to be a wedge shape. This idea isn't working so well. I thought that, well, the idea behind it was that it would all sit flat and I could mill it. I could use some pitch or some sap from a tree to kind of hold the boards together so it wouldn't move around. But as I'm milling the 2x6, it's lifting away from itself and it's not cutting the exact amount off. I don't know if I can remedy this. I don't feel like going through 2x6s, milling them, trying to find 4 that are gonna stay flat and the right thickness. This one ended up losing a 1/2 inch from one end to the other, or close to it. It was really close to a 1/2 inch of material when it's only supposed to lose a 1/4 inch. So I've got another idea, a better idea, I think, I hope, but it requires me to go into town an hour away, get some 2x10. What I'm gonna do with the 2x10 is I'm gonna stand them straight up on that gable wall and I'm gonna mill them down. So I'll be milling the height off of it instead of trying to mill flat. I can mill it standing on edge. I can prop one edge up a 1/4 inch and it's not gonna move as much when I mill it. So I'm gonna go get some 2x10 and I'm gonna make some cuts with a wedge underneath one end of it and see if I can get the right height from top to bottom. And then I'll just notch those where the outlookers go through and I'll be able to nail it all together and nail that 2x10. It'll probably be 8 inches tall, 8 1/4 inches tall at one end and 7 3/4 inches tall at the other end. But I'll be able to nail it, toe nail it into the gable wall, and that'll support everything. So unfortunately, this process wasted a bit of time and only one 2x6, but I'm gonna go get some 2x10 and I'll be back. So we made it back with a little bit of daylight to spare. 2x10, I've got the exact measurement of 8 1/4 inches at the very top, and I want it to drop in this piece 1/4 inch in that span. I don't want it to drop any more. I can always shave more off if I have to, but I don't want it to drop any more than a 1/4 inch. So at this end, I put one of those wedges, 1/4 inch door wedge. It starts out at a 1/4 inch thick and tapers down to nothing. I put one of those underneath the 2x10 on the last bunk that it's resting on. It's resting on a bunk each place, so it's fully supported. And cross our fingers on this one, see if we can mill this out and make this work. This came out really nice. I'm gonna go ahead and put another 2x12 up here and measure the thickness of that end, match it up with this next 2x10 so it continues that slope all the way down and there's no bumpy lumpies in the way. Okay, so it's kind of a wasted day. I managed to get 2 boards put up on my house. These 2 pieces of the gable end wall that line up with the rafters, they line up perfect. I couldn't ask for a better fit up, really, after all the trials and mistakes that I made trying to make this piece. I've got to go through and, well, I've got to make the last piece, this piece on the other end, and make it line up with the rafters. And then I've got to go through and trim off all these tail ends so they're all the same length. Because right now they're all different lengths from those custom milled rafters. So I've got a string line up there and I've got them all marked except for the last one I have to put up on the end. I'll go through, put that one up, go through and cut off the tail ends, and then I'll be able to make my cuts for the outlookers to come out the side here and support the eave. That will be probably started tomorrow because today the sun is setting. It's gonna get dark and cold pretty quick. And I'm kind of wore out of making mistakes. I don't feel like making any more. So until next time, guys, go make something.